137 meters long, 23 meters wide, 3 towering stories. I heard the dimensions God gave Noah, direct, terrifying, and supernaturally precise. The divine command left me completely trembling in the dark. Build yourself an ark. At that terrifying voice, I watched the greatest undertaking by human hands begin. Our sacred history reveals the immense size, the heavy timber, and its dark purpose. But to turn that solemn decree into rough wood and heavy beams, I saw Noah face crushing obstacles, hidden struggles that our ancient texts omit. But any weary builder in my lonely generation deeply understood. It started with the very ground beneath my feet. A 137-meter monster cannot be built just anywhere. He needed vast, unforgiving, stable land, far from treacherous cliffs, yet close enough to the dark cypress forests that fed his obsession. Watch with me. I saw Noah pace the terrain, testing the unstable dirt, feeling the earth's firmness, surveying the dark trees. No machines, no maps, just a lonely, maddening faith. When he finally claimed that desolate plot, he started the grueling first phase, and I felt nothing but utter dread. He tore out massive stones and bleeding roots, crushing the dirt to hold thousands of tons of wood. Using primitive tools, his terrifying drive stripped away the world I knew. Our ancient, pre-flood world fought back with endless, suffocating moisture rising from the ground. I remember how that heavy mist crept up from the earth, constantly watering the fragile surface of our doomed home. As Genesis reveals, our soil was forever weeping. That wet earth quickly turned into a treacherous mire. My own feet sank, heavy timber rotted, the muddy ground felt entirely cursed. I watched him desperately carve trenches around the site, creating muddy veins to drain away the water, terrified the earth itself would swallow his sacred sanctuary before it began. No rain fell from above. The ground itself was sweating. As he labored, my neighbors gathered. The fierce temptation to laugh with them tore at my lonely soul. Why carve out this massive wasteland? He never argued back. He was completely deaf to our human logic, driven entirely by a terrifying, silent, divine mandate. Once that scarred earth finally hardened and dried, a much darker shadow fell over him, gathering massive timber for the beast. Make the ark of cypress wood, the terrifying command echoed. These weren't just fragile little saplings. They were brutal, towering monoliths, perfectly scaled for a doomsday vessel. Hacking down just one with crude axes demanded bone-crushing strength and a deeply agonizing patience. Slaying hundreds of them required a maddening, daily ritual. Strike after strike, I heard Noah and his sons shatter the silence. The forest violently screamed as each giant fell. But his nightmare had barely begun. Dragging a dead titan back to the site was impossible. No wheels, no beasts of burden, no machines. They relied on the agonizing, primitive methods of our lost ancestors, simple wooden rollers. They shoved crushed saplings beneath the massive corpses. Hauling on frayed ropes and heavy levers, they dragged those deadweights forward, inch by painful inch. As it groaned forward, they frantically cycled the logs, a slow, bone-breaking dance. Yet every timber they dragged closer felt like another nail in our society's coffin. Still, the old man pressed on. For the man who receives instruction from God does not work by what his eyes see, but by what he truly believes. As this madness unfolded, I stood among the crowds, watching just a few exhausted men dragging the shattered forest toward an unnervingly massive grave of dirt. The jeers were deafening. I felt the powerful urge to mock him too, to keep my place in the crowd. But Noah ignored our cruel eyes, entirely bound to that unseen, terrifying voice. As the timber piled into a massive wooden mountain, the true nightmare began. Not just carving dead wood, but raising a giant leviathan meant to withstand an apocalyptic flood that would soon erase every single face I had ever known. To keep that monstrous ship from tearing apart, he had to lay the foundation first. The very spine of the ark, a massive keel meant to outlive humanity. The scriptures hold their silence, but any ancient builder among us knew the horrific truth. A vessel this huge demanded an unbroken, incredibly strong spine. It had to bear the crushing weight of the hull. 3 massive decks and endless living cargo, but there was a glaring, impossible flaw. No single tree on our doomed Earth grew 137 meters long. So he was forced to splice giant timber together, marrying trunk to forge an endlessly straight, unyielding line. A maddening puzzle that demanded flawless skill, exactness, and torturous patience. I watched them carve brilliant interlocking wooden joints, an ancient craft passed down by our vanishing civilization. When those intricate pieces were finally driven together, the bruised timber became far stronger than solid stone. To lock it all down, they hammered thick hardwood pegs deep into the wood. It created an indestructible bond, meant to survive a watery wrath I couldn't even imagine. With that massive spine finally laid down, an impossible shadow fell over his work. He now had to hoist the ark's ribs, arched, skeletal beams curving violently upward to cage the massive, empty hull. Each bone required a flawless fit, so the family relied on what our ancient craftsmen always knew best. They chiseled agonizingly perfect, custom joints. This allowed those heavy beams to bend and arch naturally as they locked into the massive keel. As those massive wooden ribs finally pierced the sky, the true, terrifying shape of our destruction materialized. Picture it with me. Colossal timber hoisted by groaning levers, frayed ropes, and exhausted, trembling human muscles. I saw them straining, bleeding to adjust those angles, scrutinizing every inch. If just one massive rib leaned too far, the entire monument to my impending death would collapse. That is why they stretched taut guide ropes from end to end. They swung heavy stones to check the brutal vertical drops, repeating that maddening cycle endless times. Seeing that skeletal beast fully rise was utterly paralyzing. A towering wooden cage, looming over a dry wasteland that had never known an ocean. Massive as a modern complex, yet birthed only by blistered hands and primitive tools. Then came the darkest hour. Sealing their escape route, a sturdy shell meant nothing if the furious floodwaters could break inside. The unseen judge was absolute: cover it inside and out with pitch. The smell was suffocating. They boiled the black earth resin until thick, slathering it on while violently hot to forge an impenetrable armor. But merely painting the outside of that coffin wasn't going to be enough to save them. Left alone, exposed wood drinks the dampness. A single tiny leak destroys everything. I watched them suffer for weeks, smearing black tar into every hidden crevice, inside and out. Every sticky layer had to cure completely. One careless mistake, and their desperate refuge would simply sink. When that foul black pitch finally hardened, the massive ark ceased being a mere wooden building. It felt intensely ominous. It became a sealed vault, engineered to survive an apocalypse my mind refused to comprehend. Next came the terrifying task of dividing the dark interior for thousands of living animals. Holy writings detail a chilling directive. Make compartments inside. The ancient word Kinningen means small, claustrophobic cells or nests. This monstrous boat was never meant to be a spacious haven. It was formed by tight cells, desperately planned to enforce order and balance when the world finally drowned. Here lies a truly crushing theological point. The scriptures hide the exact interior layout, mentioning only 3 dark floors and those tight cells. But standing outside, I could vividly imagine the desperate, practical survival logic he was brutally forced to apply. To stop the vessel from capsizing, he buried the heaviest beasts below. I imagined massive elephants and huge cattle trapped on the lowest deck, anchoring the dark ship to prevent violent, deadly rolling in the water. I stood on the middle deck, terrified among lions, bears, and deer. Up above us, thousands of birds and fragile creatures kept high for fresh air and balance. Our sacred texts confirm this massive wooden structure needed strict boundaries. Without these tight, isolated spaces, our survival was impossible. Without them, starving predators would slaughter the weak. Bloodshed and absolute chaos would consume us in the dark, and foul diseases would spread like wildfire. My father Noah crafted heavy wooden barriers, locking every wild beast into its designated cage. These thick partitions had to interlock perfectly, holding strong without breaking the massive outer hull. Every timber we carried added crushing weight. We had to breathe. The ancient scripture commanded, "You shall make an opening a cubit from above." That meant a long, continuous window running just beneath the heavy roof, yet to push fresh air through three massive, stifling decks. We relied on hidden side vents, deep overhangs blocking the violent rain, and long shadowy hallways designed to pull air from a dying world. Without that chilling breeze, the toxic animal fumes would have suffocated us. Then came the crushing burden of survival. Feeding every creature for a year demanded unimaginable stockpiles. The scriptures state, "You shall take food for yourself and for them." We dragged in endless hay, grains, shriveled fruits, roots, and heavy clay jars brimming with water. We surrendered huge chambers just to hoard our rations, shielding them from the damp. This vessel wasn't just a ship. It became our floating prison, slowly erasing our old identities as we worked constantly to survive. Shoveling endless waste down slanted wooden floors, flushing filth through narrow drainage grooves out into the sea. When every dark corridor and cramped cage was finally finished, I watched my father face our most terrifying weakness: the great timber door. It was a massive, gaping hole, wide enough for giant beasts, yet demanded enough strength to hold against the furious deep. That heavy threshold was our greatest vulnerability, but also our only salvation. I trembled looking at it, especially knowing the profound mystery described in the ancient texts. We hammered the wood, but the Creator sealed our fate, out of everything in this shadowy wooden tomb. That entrance haunted me the most. The sacred record plainly commands, "And put a door in its side." Genesis 6:16. Terrified it would shatter, we packed thick timber beams around the frame, wedging in diagonal braces and driving deep wooden joints. We used the hardest lumber we could find to prevent a catastrophic breach. We didn't have massive iron hinges to swing something this heavy. We only had raw muscle. We relied on a massive vertical pivot. It was a thick, reinforced wooden column flanking the entrance, forcing the mighty door to grind open under immense pressure, but hold completely firm. You and I must grasp this mystery. The scripture reads, "And the Lord shut him in." Genesis 7:16. We built it, but heaven locked us inside. Before the creatures came, I watched my father pace the dim corridors, striking the heavy beams, praying the black pitch had cured, desperately searching for fatal cracks. We braced the ribs, agonizing over the massive weight of our supplies. I listened to the crushing wood. A ship this massive constantly groans, creaks, and screams in the dark. My father knew every splinter. If we were doomed, he would feel it. But then, the terrifying and miraculous occurred. The ancient record is clear. The beasts walked right to us. We didn't hunt them. We didn't herd them with whips. They just came. It was a haunting, deliberate march, as though an unseen spirit dragged every living species forward. Picture that eerie moment. Silent pairs stepping from the dying forest, ravens gathering by the threshold, vicious predators pacing peacefully right beside trembling lambs, serpents sliding toward the ramp, young beasts blindly trusting a terrifying pull. They found their cells without a single roar or drop of blood. My family watched in pure dread and awe. This was no human endeavor anymore. The hand of the Almighty was moving right before our eyes. When the last creature crossed the threshold, every beast, my parents, my brothers, and our wives, just 8 of us isolated in the belly of the ship, the grueling work was done. But the true nightmare was just beginning. Our agonizing survival in the suffocating gloom during those violent days. Once the Creator slammed that massive door shut forever, a heavy, terrifying silence swallowed us whole. Beyond the timber, the doomed world kept mocking us. Inside, my heart raced. The beasts were caged, our rations buried. The pitch-black walls sealed tighter than a tomb. We were standing at the edge of humanity's utter destruction. I will never forget how the sacred scriptures recount that terrible, defining hour. In the 600th year of my father's life, the great deep shattered beneath us, and the heavy floodgates of heaven tore open. Genesis 7:11. Boiling subterranean oceans violently erupted. The planet's crust ripped apart, vomiting massive surges of crushing water. We didn't just hear rain, we felt the bedrock fracture beneath us. I clung to the floorboards as vicious earthquakes threatened to shake our sanctuary into 1,000 splintered pieces. Then came a horror beyond comprehension. The skies fractured. It was the very first rain man had ever seen, and it was an absolute massacre. Heavy, punishing torrents hammered the roof. The roaring thunder blinded me with terror as jagged lightning slashed through the darkness outside. Our massive wooden fortress, completely still until now, shuddered as the rising black water finally seized it. I thought of my friends out there, the ones who called us insane. The texts don't speak of their screaming, but I heard them, pure agony in the deluge. I envisioned their frantic running, clawing at the muddy banks, utterly consumed by a suffocating panic they had never known. Our ridiculed faith was suddenly the only salvation left on earth. The freezing depths climbed higher and higher, until our heavy timber hull finally tore free and floated. For us trapped inside, the sheer terror was suffocating. Heavy timber violently groaning, the damp deck shaking under my feet, the aggressive swaying. I wept as freezing water slammed our hull, ripping us away from the earth forever. The monstrous ship, my father's lifelong burden, was finally tested. We had no battered sails, no heavy oars, no rudders to steer us. We were helpless. We were entirely at his mercy. As the ancient words declare, the waters prevailed and increased greatly on the earth. Genesis 7:19, towering peaks vanished, grand cities drowned in mud. I sat paralyzed, feeling my entire past being erased from existence. Inside, we were a desperate, isolated universe. Outside, absolutely nothing survived. Inside this shadow, we clung to life. The isolation was crushing. You might wonder when the deafening rain stopped. The pounding ended after 40 grueling days, but our nightmare raged on. The scriptures say, the waters prevailed on the earth 150 days. Genesis 7:24, even without storms. The violent sea surged, swallowing every lost valley and peak. Locked inside our wooden prison, I felt time completely freeze. We bled through daily chores, shoveling waste, rationing scraps, bracing joints, tempted to just give up. I prayed into the darkness, endlessly waiting. Then, after months of agonizing doubt, the darkness broke. The holy text declares, and God remembered Noah. Genesis 8:1. A massive howling wind swept over the drowning earth, and the black waters slowly pulled back. Agonizingly, the depths receded, until our battered hull finally smashed into the jagged peaks of Ararat. Genesis 8:4. After endless months of suffocating gloom, my father tore open the hatch. Sharp, freezing wind ripped through the stench for the first time. Blinding sunlight pierced our shadows, but my heart sank. We still couldn't see if this broken, desolate wasteland was safe to walk on. So, fighting his own panic, he made a desperate choice. He unleashed a raven, then a fragile dove. She fluttered back to my hands, finding nowhere to land. Our graveyard was still flooded. 7 days later, we tried again. Ever wonder what it felt like to survive the end of the world? I watched the dove return, holding a fragile olive leaf, our first omen of life. 7 agonizing days passed. Father released it once more, and it vanished forever. The scarred earth was slowly breathing again, but I felt terrified. After over a year trapped inside this dark wooden sanctuary, the Creator's voice shattered the deafening silence. He commanded us to step outside. Just me, my wife, my brothers, and our parents. Just as Genesis chapter 8, verse 16 records, my father obeyed. That massive wooden door, sealed by God himself, finally broke open. A blinding, terrifying light pierced our shadows. The surviving beasts rushed past us, scattering blindly across this strange, empty world. We finally stepped onto solid rock after endless months adrift. The thick scent of muddy earth and violently cold air filled my lungs. The absolute silence was suffocating. Our past was completely erased. Every face I ever knew was gone forever. Yet divine grace spared our shattered family to start over, stepping from that massive vessel. My father Noah did something incredibly profound, grounding our fragile faith. He built a crude altar to the Creator. Standing there, surrounded by jagged rocks and endless freezing mud, he sacrificed our precious few offerings. The ancient text reveals that God accepted this sweet offering. Stepping into our deep loneliness to forge a miraculous promise, he solemnly vowed to never again destroy all living creatures with floodwaters. Then, he painted a vivid rainbow across the bruising sky. That eternal covenant steadied my fearful heart, proving that even through devastating judgment, God preserves his weary remnant, sustains life, and demands our fragile faith. The deluge was over, rendering our wooden refuge obsolete. A terrifying new reality loomed. 8 lonely souls, burdened with the crushing task of repopulating a dead earth. Entire nations would somehow bleed from our weary lineage. The empty globe gained new seasons and strict divine boundaries, forcing our broken family to carry redemption's story onward. From our decaying wooden sanctuary, the entirety of post-flood humanity would struggle into existence. I stared at the ark. That monument of raw obedience and salvation stood as a haunting reminder. The Creator actually rescues those who blindly trust his terrifying voice. You and I both know the agonizing truth now. That colossal ark wasn't merely a boat. It was my family's desperate faith carved into timber. It was our only salvation, preserved across 3 pitch-black, suffocating levels. It was a brutal divine remedy for profound evil, yet an undeniable anchor of love for our miserable lives. But my father's trauma didn't end inside those wooden walls. The grueling restart of biblical history, the haunting new covenant, the countless lost generations that followed us, they all weave directly into a terrifyingly beautiful, much greater divine blueprint. Stick with me. Click the video on your screen to uncover our painful struggle after the Genesis floodwaters receded, and how it forever reshaped human history. Biblical Ka.